Chapter 7. About an hour after Tamrat left, Steve came into the escape pod. The seats weren't built with Ishi in mind, and he shifted uncomfortably and moved his tail around so he wasn't putting too much pressure on it.
"You look like rubbish," he said.
"I'm having a bad day," I told him. He patted me on the shoulder.
"Yeah, I kind of figured. The enhancements, your families, and Tamrat giving you the old heave-ho."
I looked up. "She told you?"
"Didn't have to,"
she said, his tongue tasting the air.
"All these emotions hovering about. I can smell the whole thing."
"She wants to go back to Rarl with Volonic," I said.
"That's daft," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "There's something else going on. You can count on it. That girl is emotional, even for a mammal. But she's not barking mad. And there's no way she'd throw over a relatively choice bloke such as yourself for a git like Volonic."
"Thanks for saying so."
"The thing is, upgrades or not, you're part of the team, yeah? You can't sit here and mope all day. Also, if I know anything about girls, you don't want to let her see that she's got to you. Act like it's no big deal. Maybe get a little chummy with me, son. Make her jealous, that'll bring her around."
"All it'll do is get me kicked in the face."
"Probably true, but the point is to act like you don't give a toss. That's what works for me."
"Well, you're cooler than I am," I said.
"I'm a reptile, mate. Do we need to review the whole warm-blooded and cold-blooded thing?"
I sighed. "I just don't see why I should even be out there. I have nothing to contribute at this point."
"Nothing if you're feeling sorry for yourself. Look, there's not a stupid, reckless and irresponsible thing this lot hasn't done that you weren't at the centre of. You think we've gotten this far because of the technology? It helped, but in the end, we did all that because you're always there saying we need to go off on one mad romp or another. Even if you can't be on the ground, we need you with us to figure out what completely daft approach is going to get the job done."
"Thanks for saying so, but..."
"There's a strategy meeting in 10 minutes, and you better be there or I will mock you."
No mockery was required. I was there when the meeting began. Neither Tamrat nor me son would look at me. But Volonic was friendly, so bonus there. We were still about 2 hours from the planet where we were to meet Captain Quassel. Meanwhile, the agreeably comatose Ardov was put into the escape pod. Dr. Roop didn't want any chances with him. So, at the first sign we couldn't control him, we could simply jettison him into the void.
"We have all been very concerned about what happened to Zeke during his battle with Ardov," Dr. Roop said. "Why did his former enhancement shut down, and why can they not be reactivated? Might the same thing happen to the rest of us? We have some answers, and I'm afraid the news is not good."
"Did Zeke somehow manage to damage our systems?" Misan asked.
"Don't be stupid," Tamrat snapped. "How could he have done that?"
She shrugged. "I wouldn't put anything past him." Tamrat rolled her eyes.
"As near as I can tell, he burned out his upgrades. He used too many abilities in too short a time, and the nanites that control the former upgrades stopped working. They took out the standard Confederation skill tree as well. The only thing that didn't shut down was the translation technology. I think it's because, as Dr. Roop said, it's an entirely separate system." "It appears," Dr. Roop said, "our ability to integrate this technology is limited. I told you back at the Hidden Fortress that there was something I did not like about the code. It appears to be unstable."
"Will these nanites harm us?" Charles asked.
Only if you are in a dangerous situation when you experience a malfunction," Dr. Roop said.
"You mean like pretending you're Superman?" Misan asked.
"Just back off," Tamrat said. "This is my fault. I should be able to fix it, but I can't figure out how to repair the code."
I was grateful to Tamrat for defending me, but she still wouldn't meet my eye when I looked at her.
"No one is to blame,"
Dr. Roop said, his voice very kind.
"The formers were perhaps the most advanced beings ever to exist in our galaxy. They built a sophisticated civilization that regarded millennia the way we regard months. Tamrat, that you cannot solve a problem with technology they engineered is hardly to your discredit. In any event, given what we know about the Formers, it is possible that the code may not be flawed at all. It may have been designed this way.
It may have been designed to malfunction, Charles asked. That makes no sense.
To beings like you and me, perhaps,
Dr. Roop agreed.
Our knowledge of the Formers is very limited, but we do believe they were experimenters, compulsive tinkerers on a cosmic scale. They were possibly even capricious by our standards. Some legends portray them as cosmic tricksters who loved nothing more than putting beings, worlds, even entire civilizations into difficult positions and watching what happens next. Planting technology that gives beings astounding power and then taking away those powers is entirely consistent with what we know of the Formers.
That made sense to me. Smelly, full name Smellimportunifil Ixmon Puklump Iraton 9, an artificial consciousness who had spent months living in my head, hadn't been a Former, but he had come out of Former society, and it had loved putting me in difficult situations just to see how I'd deal with them. I didn't think it would ever allow me to come to real harm, but it hadn't minded testing my limits. But what about the rest of you? I asked. Are you going to just shut down at some point? Tamrat sighed.
The short answer is yes. There are two ways it can go. The first is that these nanites will fail under heavy use. That's what happened with you, Zeke. You overtaxed them and the code went into some kind of self-destruct loop. It seems to be a mechanism that, as Dr. Roop said, is worked directly into the source code. From what I can tell, it may be too deeply embedded in the tech tree's operating system to remove, or modify, or work around. And like with Zeke, it will take out the Confederation skill tree abilities too. Everything but translation will be wiped out.
I understand, Charles said. This limits our options, but it does not change the overall plan. We must simply avoid conflict, using less taxing stealth-based skills, rather than combat, which tends to require multiple uses simultaneously. Weapons, shields, speed, and so forth. Might that not solve the problem?
Unfortunately not,
Dr. Roop said.
If there is an additional flaw. I fear that time is also a factor. The code is in a constant state of decay, and any of us could find our skills non-functional at any time.
So,
Misan summarized,
using these abilities too much could shut down the system, but saving them might not do any good because the system could shut down on its own anyhow.
Yes,
Dr. Roop agreed.
Then either approach to managing upgrades, aggressive or cautious, could be equally flawed, Charles asked.
That pretty much sums it up, Tamrat said.
So, how do we get everyone out of prison without risking our lives?
Misan asked.
I'm afraid we don't have an answer to that just yet,
Dr. Roop said. Something then occurred to me. Wait a minute, if everyone is vulnerable, then there's no reason why I can't go along with you.
I do not think so,
Charles said.
Every one of us might be vulnerable, but if I understand all of this, we might also get through an operation without any of us experiencing problems. We certainly had no difficulties at the police station.
We might experience difficulties, but we might not,
Dr. Roop said.
It is not the same as bringing along someone who we know is entirely vulnerable. I'm not sure I can agree to anyone taking that sort of risk.
And who put you in charge?
Misan asked.
Zeke thinks he can tell us what to do, and so do you, but I don't remember agreeing on that.
Let's hold on, I began.
No,
Dr. Roop conceded.
That's a fair point. I have been presuming that I should be in charge, at least until Captain Quassel is among us, because I am the eldest. It seemed the most natural arrangement, but I do not wish to force this hierarchy on you.
Of course Captain Quassel should call the shots, I said. She has the most experience. Nothing else makes sense.
Easy for you to say,
Misan said.
You guys are always the ones making decisions. I don't see it getting us very far.
Back off,
Tamrat told her.
She may have a point,
Valonic offered. Perhaps it is time for some new voices to be heard. No one responded to this. It wasn't that I didn't get where Mi-san was coming from. She had never asked for any of this. She'd agreed to go to an alien space station as a kind of cultural ambassador, and now she found herself in constant danger. Space battles and prison breakouts were not for everyone. She was tough, but even she could only take so much. Now that her family was in danger, maybe she'd reached her breaking point. I knew that thinking about my family being held by Nora Price made me sick. Look, Mi-san, I said, I understand what you're saying. None of us knew what we would be facing when we left Confederation Central, and maybe things are worse than we expected. It's hard, but we're in a situation where we can make a real difference, and I think we have to try. Letting the beings with the most knowledge and the most experience make the calls is the smart move.
I agree with Zeke, Charles said. Doing nothing and waiting is not a choice we have. The headmaster of my school, who has been like a father to me, has been arrested, and I want to help him, but we are doomed to fail if we do not get the fads off Earth. Alice is growing weaker, and our own prospects of helping anyone diminish rather than grow with time.
Doesn't it bother you that Zeke and his alien friends are always the ones deciding where we go and what we do? Asked Mi-san.
I have no need to be the one making the decisions, if the decisions are sound, Charles said. And I think that Zeke's record, when you factor in the difficulty of our situations, is quite impressive. I am certainly content to have Captain Quassel take charge once we reach her. Swift action under her leadership is surely our best option.
Unless Captain Quassel has an idea of how we might fix the former skills, Dr. Roop said. What if she has a way for us to be back at full and dependable strength, but doing so will take weeks or months?
And what about Alice? I asked. Dr. Roop looked away.
We may have to make some difficult decisions.
I'm not signing on to any decision that involves letting one of us die, I told him.
Of course not. There are always options, but every option may involve additional risk.
He sighed.
That is all we know for now. When we transfer to Captain Quassel's ship, the medical staff may be able to help Alice. At the very least, we should be able to place her in medical stasis. We will see what our choices look like at that time.
Maybe we should put this to a vote, Mi-san said. All in favor of handing the operation over to Captain Quassel? I said, and raised my hand in the air. So did everyone else, including Mi-san. I knew she was frustrated, and I figured her pushing back against our decision-making was just her way of expressing it, but she still wasn't going to argue against reason.
I'm going to go over the code one more time, Tamrat said. Perhaps you should sleep, Dr. Roop said.
She snorted.
Like that's going to happen.
Tamrat went over to work at the console, and I followed her. The things she'd said before had hurt me, and I felt uncomfortable trying to have a normal conversation with her, but I could see she was being hard on herself. By the time I reached her, she was already at a workstation, streaming through lines of code. I put a hand on the back of her chair.
Not now,
she said to me. Look, give yourself a break, I told her. Dr. Roop is right. You can't be expected to be able to figure something out like this. You're putting yourself up against the formers. She shook her head.
You don't understand. This is the moment when everyone is counting on me and I'm letting them down.
What do you mean, the moment? What about all the other moments? What about all the times we needed stuff done and you just did it and made it seem like no big deal? It's not like this is your one turn at the plate.
I have no idea what that last part meant, she said. I'm getting something about team-based recreational activities, which sounds pretty stupid. I don't have time for that sort of thing.
Why don't you just take a break? At least until we get to the new ship.
No,
she said with a sigh. She brushed hair out of her eyes.
I'll be miserable if I stop working. I appreciate you're trying to make me feel less bad about myself, but it's really not your concern.
Not so long ago, I'd believed we were going to burst into whatever prison held our friends and shut down any resistance. I'd known what it felt like to be almost unimaginably powerful, and now we were all powerless or close to it. I sat by myself, trying not to think about how miserable I was watching Tamrat work. I was also trying not to think about how miserable she obviously was. She was always so hard on the beings she liked, but I realize now she was 1,000 times harder on herself. I also had to admire how she wouldn't quit. Maybe her tenacity, her single-mindedness could get her into trouble, but it had also saved her life. And our lives, plenty of times. If anyone could fix this problem with sheer intellect and force of will, it would be her. But I worried it would be out of her reach. I lost track of time, but Steve snapped me out of my thoughts by telling me we were coming out of tunnel. I braced myself for the weird, disorienting feeling as the ship shifted from who knows what or where and back into the universe as we understand it. We emerged in the outer fringes of a solar system, typical of those that the formers had touched. There was a single yellow dwarf star in the center, and several large gas giants pulling dangerous space debris into their gravity wells. We zoomed past these until we saw an Earth-like planet ahead. At first glance, it seemed almost identical to Earth, but there were more smaller continents, and while there was plenty of blue water, there were a few patches of green to be seen through the cloud cover. Most of the land looked brown or dull yellow. Tamrat looked out and sighed.
You know, I feel like marine predator poop, but seeing that actually kind of puts things in perspective.
What?
Steve asked.
Some fringe planet no one's ever heard of?
She shook her head.
We're so wrapped up in our own problems, which are pretty big, I admit. It's kind of easy to forget the bigger picture. We're traveling on a spaceship in a galaxy full of amazing life. We're playing with technology that beings who are so smart, we can only gape at them like morons.
I never gape like a moron, Steve said. My gaping is always dignified.
I smiled to myself. Tamrat could come across as the most negative being, but then she would say something like that. Maybe she really was an optimist. I needed to be an optimist too, I decided. I didn't really understand her reasons for wanting to go back to Rural, but I had to respect them. At the same time, I hoped I could change her mind. She turned and saw me smiling at her.
What?
I just like how you look at things. For an instant, she smiled, and then, as though she was remembering something, her expression turned cold, and she looked away. She was hiding something from me. I was sure of it now, and if her decision to go back to Rural was a problem, it could have a solution. I was going to find it, and I was going to fix everything. Maybe that was a little ambitious, since I had no idea how I was going to fix myself, but I felt sure I could come up with something. Things were going to work out, I told myself. They always had, and they would again. Maybe Tamrat would crack this problem, or maybe Captain Quassel would know what to do. If it came right down to it, I still had the Smelly option. Before leaving, Smelly had no gender, had given me a small metallic disc, an entangled quantum signaling device, which I still had in my pocket. Smelly had promised it would come help me one time if I needed it. Given my history of getting into horrible life-or-death situations, I hated to call in that favor until I was really desperate, but if it was the only option left on the table for resolving the current crisis, I wouldn't hesitate. I actually felt a little less terrible. We were going to make it through this, I decided. We'd won before, and we would win again.
That's a bit odd, Steve said. Captain Quassel was supposed to meet us here, but I don't see any other ships, Confederation or otherwise, in the system.
Dr. Roop looked up, alarmed.
Let me take a look.
He began to walk over to the console. That was when everything went black.